So hello and welcome to today's video. So every single person watching this video has played a few games that you've enjoyed for many months that have become a staple in your life in some way. If you're in your 20s or 30s, you can probably think of about 3-4 games that you played the hell out of during high school and have very fond memories of. But of course, a lot of games aren't meant to be enjoyed for eternity. There will come a time when you just exhaust absolutely everything the game you love has to offer. This can be anything from 100%ing it, getting all achievements, completing all the DLCs, newer games in the series get released or whatever, or you just find other games to enjoy. That particular game becomes more of a distant memory, and maybe sometime in the future, you decide to revisit that old game you like. Maybe it's getting a remaster, or you just want to replay it for old time's sake, and you emulate it or whatever. And while you're enjoying that game, you start to get a bit of a reignited interest in it. But you take to YouTube, you look up stuff about that game, maybe something you forgot, and then you start to see a lot of cut content from the game. When it comes to cut content, it can often breathe a lot of new life into these old games you adored when you were younger. When it comes to cut content, pretty much every form of media out there has kind of cut content. It's all a part of the creative design process. This affects movies and TV shows as well. But unlike movies and TV shows, the biggest difference is when you watch a film or a TV show, you don't have access to the core files. Even if you have the disc, you just have a main menu which might come with deleted scenes and bloopers, maybe interviews with the cast, but that's it really. You never really get shown a lot of the bigger cut stuff. But when it comes to games, you either have them on a disc or downloaded, and with that comes all the files. That includes the models, the scripts, the audio, subtitles, data, and so much more. Now of course these are always encrypted in some way, but sooner rather than later data miners will find a way to break those files open and do whatever they want with the game. On PC especially, this is usually done to force open the doors of modding and unleash limitless possibilities. I'm sure we all know modding, it's what keeps those old games alive decades later. But there's a second subgroup of data miners who don't really care about, say, adding CJ from San Andreas into every single game, but just to comb through the files and find unused and incredibly weird stuff. But to fans, regardless of whatever gets found in the files, it's always interesting seeing and hearing about this stuff because it's brand new content you've likely never seen before, and it gives you an insight into the game development process, or gives you an idea on what the game is going to be like initially. Maybe even generating some discussion in the fan base about the stuff that was found, or maybe explain some rather unusual things you might stumble across in the game, say due to a glitch, unusual emptiness, or a big plot hole. Of course, there's differing levels of cut content out there that can be found. These range from things that can be fully restored by modding to remnants that are just small tidbits of audio or code string leftovers, or even seen in pre-release material, or in some cases, artwork from the developer themselves. Sometimes cut content itself is implied by a strange oddity in the game, like you might find a weird area that, while explorable, something feels really off. It's clearly missing something but you don't know what, and that's what makes it feel weird. Then you might have some other people asking about this weird area or a weird pickup and nobody really knows what it's used for. Now by far the most known about cut content are just leftover files because, as said, when you have any game those files are waiting to be dug into. Depending on what gets found, you may end up with something that can be fully restored into the game itself, or just tiny remnants of code that may employ a cut weapon. When you see it for the first time, it's very oddly captivating. If it's an unused cutscene, it can really make you think about the direction the story was supposed to take. Like in Shadow of the Tomb Raider, the entire ending was reshot. The original version had a shot of a postcard from a character named Natla who never appeared in the game, but did appear in the previous games. But to fans, when they saw this original ending, it raised questions about her appearing in a possible DLC, given the letter was on a map that had a circle around Peru. The cut content gets better when it's also fully playable, and we're not just talking about watching 1 or 2 cutscenes or hearing some audio files. I'm talking about content that is moddable back into the game and it feels completely new. Sometimes files are missing and they might need a bit of tweaking from a modder, but they'll get it working or make a recreation. But to fans, it can be like a bit of a free DLC update in a way. Like in GTA San Andreas, there's 6 entirely deleted main storyline missions that are all fully playable through modding, which gives you about an extra 30 to 40 minutes of content to enjoy. Sometimes restorable cut content itself does have some very weird oddities that seem very out of place. Instead, I'm talking about things that really do not match the tone of the game at all. I'm best known for doing a hell of a lot of cut content on Bully, and some of the things that were found were just incredibly dark and weird, like the ability to drown and Jimmy falling into acid in a boss fight. It really makes you think, yeah, that's certainly a design choice they went with. But sometimes if you're really engaged in the game and its story, some of the more eagle-eyed people might pick up on some weird oddities in the game that may allude to something missing. Not necessarily something big, but maybe a weird quip by a character about events that never happened, or a strange room that's a bit too detailed, and fans of the game might start theorising about this weird oddity and what it means. One example I can remember is in Black Ops 2's Mob of the Dead. One of the characters Weasel would sometimes say Nikolai, Nikolai, Nikolai. Why do I keep hearing that name? Now for those unfamiliar, Nikolai was a character from Black Ops 1 Zombies who wasn't present in Black Ops 2. At the time at least. And it led many to assume that this was hinting towards the next DLCs, and he and the other cast would return. And while they did return in the last DLCs as younger alternative versions of themselves from World War I, Nikolai here had absolutely nothing to do with Weasel from Mob of the Dead. So 2 years go by, Black Ops 3 releases, and the quote still turned out to lead absolutely nowhere, leading a lot of fans to actually wonder if there was something planned that got scrapped that was going to connect these two characters together. And to be fair, they did. In Black Ops 4, that was over 5 years later, but it's pretty obvious something was planned that never really came to fruition. And it's still got a lot of players theorising about what it might have been anyway. One of the ones I remember was a possible World War II map. That never happened of course, that was just a theory, but you can kind of see how sometimes just leaving something in the game that leads absolutely nowhere, or doesn't do anything, is more than enough to raise some eyebrows. Another well-known example, if you include glitching or cheating, is the ice key from Banjo-Kazooie. Now, I never played Banjo-Kazooie as a kid because I was more into PlayStation, but in Banjo-Kazooie there's an ice key located behind a massive wall of ice. You can't get it by normal means, but entering a cheat code will remove the wall so you can pick it up, and it does absolutely nothing. And for the longest time players wondered what this could be, and in traditional pre-internet gaming era, rumours spread all across the place about some secret ice level that would only show itself if you followed an ultra-precise 10,000 step guide, then it would unlock. But these are the kind of weird cut content oddities that ended up being a part of a hoax, and they worked because you could partly experience the cut content. There was a bit of proof that it must do something, because why would they have a key here? Nothing happened of course until data miners got their hands into Donkey Kong 64 and found out the ice key may have had a role in that, with some unused stop and swap feature, which also went absolutely nowhere. This stuff is clearly meant to be unused, and that's why you can find it by glitching and cheating only, but it's always interesting nonetheless because there's always something about these kind of oddities that reek of unfinished ideas. Sometimes cut content or concepts will only appear in the form of developers, be it public comments, concepts or portfolio work, and never found in the game files. Usually these are the most interesting I find, as it often gives you a much clearer picture of what the team were planning on making entirely. Oftentimes with cut content found in the game files, it gives you a taste of it and often leaves you assuming. And when someone who helped work on the game speaks out about it, or has their portfolio up, it's more of a clear indication since this is straight from the source itself. In many cases when a developer speaks or has their portfolio up, it's usually accompanied by an entirely new character, weapon, level or whatever that nobody's ever heard about, which really do make you think about how much different your favourite game would have been if they kept these ideas in. Now of course the posted works do vary by the developer. Like a character designer is obviously only going to post characters, and someone who only worked on the soundtrack might have say some unreleased tracks from the game stored at home. A great example of this actually is Spyro A Hero's Tale. The original composer Guy Cockcroft went ahead and uploaded all the tracks he developed for the game before he was replaced by Paul Lawler. And many of these tracks are actually still found in the demo disc to Spyro A Hero's Tale. But sometimes developers are more than happy to share bits of info here and there. Like in the GTA community, former developer Obey Verme keeps dropping bits of information about his time developing the GTA games, and how some things changed or how things worked on a very technical level. But speaking about stuff working on a technical level might be extremely interesting to aspiring game developers who really want to know what goes on under the hood. And lately, two former Crash to Insanity developers set up their own YouTube channel, J-Mac and Webster, who've been dropping never-before-seen concept art alongside their own memories developing the game, and even clearing up misconceptions about some of the cut content. But because of the massive increase in cut content over the years, there's been a community of people out there who strive to acquire development builds of varying games and publish them for fan use. Now this is often found on Hidden Palace. Now I just want to say I'm not affiliated with them, but somehow these people, I genuinely do not know how they do it, but they get their hands on all kinds of in-development builds for all kinds of games on pretty much every single platform out there. And these vary of course, sometimes it can be weeks before release, sometimes builds being so early they have more placeholders and finalised assets and everything in between. It's an actual treasure trove if you love cut content. The builds really do vary in stability. Because they're in development, obviously they're way more prone to crashes, but the content inside is so much more wider and vast, full of changes. Like in late 2024, a lot of beta builds of Black Ops 2 Zombies started surfacing, and these had early designs of all the DLCs, including the scrapped 5th DLC which brought over all the maps from Black Ops 1, including very early designs of Mob of the Dead and Buried. And I'm talking about how the maps were so different it was completely unrecognisable. Like it turns out, Blood of the Dead in Black Ops 4 was actually using the beta map layout from Mob of the Dead after all. and Buried had two completely different map layouts that don't even resemble the one we got in the final game at all. Like, one that caught my interest lately was this very early rendition of Origins. This looks absolutely nothing like the one we got in summer 2013. This looks like somebody's just only started learning how to use mod tools on Call of Duty World at War. But no, this is actually what Origins looked like in its probably earliest state ever known. In fact, it's that early it's not even got any sounds. But often beta leaks like these just feel like completely brand new content in their own right, especially when they have drastic overhauls like the Black Ops 2 Zombies one. And then we kind of circle back to the data mining part. It's funny because sometimes you have these beta builds themselves, which have their own cut content inside of them. So you have cut content inside cut content. Going back to Black Ops 2, I feel like I've mentioned that game at least 3 or 4 times in this video alone. It's actually quite common knowledge there was a scrapped game mode called Meat, but you can play it in the beta build. Something like, say, Super Mario 64, one of the most legendary game myths of all time, was Luigi being playable. Then it turns out he was playable all along, and thanks to that massive Giga leak in 2020, it just handed over his model to people on a platinum plated platter. I feel like demos also kind of fall under this grouping too, because demos are actually earlier versions of the game, but done in a way that closely resembles the final game with changes here and there, and often stripped down because, you know, it's a demo. No game developer wants you to stumble upon unfinished content in a demo, and they only want to give you a teaser of the game instead of handing the game over to you for free. It's only when you prod through the files you get the juicier content. Like when the E3 build of Spyro 3 released to the public, using cheats of course you could play an earlier version of the Spike boss fight and encounter many unused enemies, and in some cases full on completely different arenas too, like this area in Molten Crater. But speaking of demos actually, I'm also going to bring up Crash to Insanity again, but in the cutscene in the final game where Crash and Cortex meet the evil twins, you can kind of tell this cutscene is very weird, because you can see this haze-like thing off in the background, and when the game resumes, it's not there, some big ass cliff is here instead. This is the home of Farmer Ernest, and you go there before the statue boss fight, but it is so jarring in the final game to see such a strong difference in such a small time. But one of the weird things about this is in the demo to Crash to Insanity, the area is completely finalised if you manage to glitch across the sea. So I guess sometimes these oddities may not imply something that was supposed to be present, they just never got around to removing or updating it entirely, be it time constraints or something that kind of just flew under the radar. So what was my introduction into the world of cut content? Well, if I'm remembering correctly, it was probably Spyro 3 Year of the Dragon on PS1. It's the very first game I ever played, and I remember there were some cheats and glitches that let you experience the cut content in the game itself, at least unintentionally. I think when my family first got the internet I was looking up PS1 cheats, and of course naturally looked up Spyro cheats. And one of the cheats I found was one that let you play any character quote in the level you were in. The cheat code to this was square square, circle circle, square square, circle circle. And I was captivated to listen to the characters again, but there were definitely some unused quotes here, from characters that never appeared in specific levels, and one that really stuck out to 6-year-old me was a quote from the Professor character about the rocket in Evening Lake that he supposedly built, but the Professor doesn't appear in the game until the last world anyway, in Agent 9's level. So it got 6-year-old me thinking that the Professor must have been somewhere in the game for you to find him, and if you find him maybe he'd build the rocket for you and you wouldn't need to do all these individual levels. But there's also another glitch in Spyro 3 where if you got zapped by Zoe underwater, then you died, you could actually respawn on land but you'd be swimming in the air. And in one level, Dino Mines, you could actually access a hidden boss battle arena. There was no enemy or objective here, and the music was default, but to really young me I might as well have found the lost city of Atlantis. Now I'm not claiming I found this initially, somebody probably did way before me, but the amazement I had at finding this place by myself was massive. I remember telling my friends at school about it, and they didn't believe me at all, until I showed them. Between finding characters that were never supposed to appear in other levels and a completely new boss battle arena, I'm pretty sure that Spyro grew a strong interest in cut content. Also, sticking with Spyro, I found out nearly 20 years later that Spyro 2 includes a showcase of cut content in the guidebook after you get 100% completion. So yeah, I'd say my interest in cut content stemmed from Spyro. And as such, I have such a strong interest in cut content like that as a whole. But yeah, that was my introduction into the world of cut content, and I've always been kind of interested in finding out what was cut in my favourite games ever since, and I'm pretty sure you have as well. Like, I'm pretty sure all of you have a game out there that you kind of want to hear the cut content of, so you can actually keep that interest in that game going, if that makes sense. But that is it for today's video. Thank you for watching and have a great day.